Hello, in this video, we're going to take a look at Form 1023 from the IRS. Thanks for watching Debs and Creds, a division of Greystone GRC. Here is Form 1023 from the IRS. It's a form you use to apply for 501c3 status with the Internal Revenue Service. This form is from 2017. Still, it provides a good guideline as to what you need to prep to be able to file your application. So the first thing is the name of your organization exactly as it appears in your organizing document. And then, of course, the mailing address, city address, contact, etc. Whether there's an authorized representative, are you using an attorney or an accountant? We'd recommend you use an attorney, an accountant, or a tax specialist to help you file this form and give them the necessary power of attorney. And then, was any of your officers here and trustees paid or promised payment to help plan and manage and advise you about this? Just a disclosure statement. Then moving on to the organization's website and the email. So far, nothing too complex, or so it seems. Next comes the organizational structure on page 2. When we look at this organizational structure, if you're a corporation, it asks you to include your articles of incorporation. If you're a limited liability company, add some other stuff. One of the key messages here is that you should have your incorporation properly documented, including the bylaws. And Part 3 covers that. It says, do not file this application until you have amended your organizing documents along with anything else that you need so that your application is not kicked back to you because of a misstep in the application process. So it's more than completing this form, it's also getting your organizing documents properly aligned. So looking at the first bullet there, it says, what's your purpose? Is it a charitable, religious, educational, or scientific goal, etc.? So you need to be able to answer that appropriately. And then the next section says, what happens if the charity dissolves? What happens to all that money in the fund that's left over? There are some special provisions on how that should be disposed of. And then there's a narrative, a description of your activities. You need to go ahead and provide your past, present, and planned activities in a narrative. This is where an expert can help too. And then we jump to the compensation section. The compensation begins at the top and it goes through to page 4. We'll see there's more questions here on page 4. But what's really interesting is this conflict of interest policy. Be sure that you've adopted a conflict of interest policy that's consistent with the samples that they've provided. Moving along to page 5, we're still on compensation. And then we have members and other individuals that are associated with you, your history, your specific activities here at the bottom of page 5. Do you support or oppose candidates in a political campaign in any way? If so, explain, etc. So at this point, they're beginning to branch into the kind of activities that you perform, the kind of nonprofit you are. And here in the specific activities, they're talking about fundraising. Check all the fundraising programs you will be conducting: mail solicitations, email solicitations, personal solicitations, and so on. And the list goes on. Scrolling further down, there are a few more questions about joint ventures, etc. And then there's a specific question about, are you applying for exemptions to childcare organization under the 501k? And then you have a whole different process to follow if that's true. And then moving on to page 7, they talk about specific activities. Will you operate in a foreign country or countries? Moving on to page 8, more on specific activities. Close connections with any organizations. Moving on to page 9, now we're asking for financial data. This is a statement of revenues and expenses. If you are in existence for less than 5 years, complete one for each year. They're basically asking for your history in terms of current year expected gifts, grants, membership fees, gross investment income, etc. So gifts, grants, memberships, fees. Let's move on down. And here we're at a balance sheet. They're asking for balance sheet information. And then we move on to part 10, public charity status. And this is another area where an expert can help you. There is a difference between a private foundation and a public charity. And understanding that will help you fill this section out correctly. Page 11, we're looking at the public charity status. And then there's user fee information. And then there's a blank page. And then we move on to supporting schedules. So for churches, this is the form that you need to fill out here. Lots of detailed questions. Again, having an expert will be helpful. Let's scroll on down to the next section, Schedule B, which is for schools, colleges, and universities. If you operate a school as an activity, complete Schedule B. That's on page 14. And then let's scroll on down to page 15. It continues in schools and colleges. And then on page 16, if you're running hospitals or medical research organizations, then go ahead and fill out this section. You can see that these questions are getting detailed. Scrolling on to page 18, supporting organizations, page 19, supporting organizations continued, page 20, these are organizations not filing a 1023. And Schedule E, and then we're on Schedule F, which is homes for elderly, handicapped, and low-income housing, page 22, the kind of housing you provide, applications forms, etc. So it's a level of detail you need, and depending on your nonprofit, you've got to target and fill out the detail that matches your needs. And then, of course, successors. And then we're on to page 25 for organizations providing scholarships, fellowships, educational loans, or other educational grants to individuals and private foundations. Once again, that private foundation concept crops up. And scrolling down onto page 26, continuing on scholarships. And then at the end, there's a checklist. This checklist is to help you make sure you've completed the form appropriately. While this is something you may be able to do yourself, don't be surprised if an incomplete or a mismatched data element kicks the return back to you. This is where using a professional is recommended as you work through your Form 1023. But notice that they haven't asked you for your personal information, and that's an important concept to remember. Thank you so much for watching.